For the middle of June, this is actually a fairly exciting looking weather map today. We have so much going on in so many different places. Obviously, we've got the heat wave underway in the Northeast back to the Ohio Valley and the lower Great Lakes. And the first excessive heat warnings are going up in some places. So we've got potential tropical cyclone one in the southwest Gulf of Mexico. That's still a potential tropical cyclone. Good news. The winter storm warnings that were up in western Montana and into parts of Idaho, those are gone. And we've got a ton of severe weather tonight from Minnesota all the way down to Kansas. So let's get started here on this Tuesday night, the 18th of June, the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast, which is brought to you by Tempest by Weatherflow, the revolutionary Tempest weather system that you can have enjoying the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. Runs from your mobile device, easy to install. And if you purchase this or anything else from the Tempest website, use the link that's on the description to this podcast and use the coupon code Spring 2024, because if you do, you will get.
You'll get 10% off, and you only have 2 days left before spring officially is over. Joe?
Right, in which case next on Sunday I'll have a new code in place. It'll
Okay.
probably be summer 2024, but we'll see. Uh really a lot going on. First of all, before we get to all the busy stuff, just want to just mention about this, with respect to the beginning of this stretch of 90-degree plus heat that we're seeing. One thing that actually surprised me was the fact that the dew points climbed up as fast as they did today. I mean, I saw they were in the mid to upper 60s in a lot of places. I mean, it had to be uncomfortable.
Well, I didn't spend too much time outside, and to tell you the truth, I have felt a lot worse stepping outside. I mean, this is only the beginning, of course, of a protracted spell of 90 plus degree weather. So it wasn't horrible out there, but certainly it was, to use Archie Bunker's term, stifling, to say the least.
Oh yeah, and here, on the other hand, here in North Georgia, it was a nice day because uh, we had a lot of clouds early, at least through the morning. Nothing that made the sky look threatening. It was enough cloud cover that you'd see faint glimpses of sun here and there, but it kept the temperatures from rising very much. And in fact, it never got out of the 70s here, which was nice. Even though it finally did break out around 2 o'clock to partly sunny, and was like that for a couple of hours, and then the clouds came back in. But it was nice. Actually, I actually went for my walk today in the middle of the day because it was still in the mid 70s.
And Cecilia Hernandez on our chat board was so confident. She said a few minutes ago, she said, I bet Joe Giaffi really had a lot of heat out there today. And somebody else pointed out, says, nah, whenever we sweat, Joe always seems to have much better weather than we do. And case in point, you did.
Yeah, it was great. Well, because we're underneath that high, so we're getting more of a northeast wind, and that's not a hot wind here. Some places it downslopes. If you go into some of the valleys, and the sun's out, it gets pretty warm. But not up, where I am. Certainly, you get up into the elevation, and it's actually pretty nice. And this morning, I think it was down. Well, it didn't get that cool overnight last night because of cloud cover, so it was in the mid 60s this morning for the lows. But that was listen. If it was like this every day, it'd be great.
Well, it says a lot that if you have an elevation of, what is it now, 2,200 feet?
Hmm.
Certainly makes that, in meteorology, the dry adiabatic lapse rate suggests that on most days when you climb 1,000 feet up, you lose 3.5 degrees. So at 2,200 feet, you must have been at least 8 or 9 degrees cooler than people who are down at ground level. And that certainly works in your favor during spells of hot weather.
Atlanta is roughly about 700 or 800 feet above sea level. When you go to the south of town, and out to where the airport is, it's actually lower than that. So I'm a good 1,500 feet higher than than where Hartsfield Airport is. So If it's 90 there, it's going to be, subtract 6 or 7 degrees from that, maybe even 8 degrees. It's going to be 82 or 83 here.
Yeah, no question. For those of you who might be considering moving someplace, before you move, maybe you ought to check out the elevation, because that's
Yes,
keeping you cool in the summertime. Of course, if you're not particularly, happy with cold and snow, that may work against you in the winter. But you can't have
because
everything.
it does snow here in the wintertime, and it does, as I've said often enough, it gets brutally cold on these cold air masses that come down. I mean, I've been below zero, uh, 5 or 6 times in the last 2 years for morning lows, and you do get days where it doesn't get above freezing. So uh, it ain't what you think it is, folks. It's all about location. So if you're thinking about moving south, but you don't want and you're shying away from it because of the summer heat, think mountains. But not too many people should think about that because there's a backlash here going on with a lot of folks that are coming either back from Florida or moving down south, but they're moving into mountain country and overpopulating the place.
Well, why don't we check to see what it's like in other parts of the country? Whenever you want to give me the cue, I have the radar all set and ready to go here.
All right, just give me 1 second, and let me just do two things. First off, welcome to everybody on the chat board tonight, and to those of you for those of you lurking in the background. Welcome to tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. I hope some of you lurking in the background are from the Texas coast because we're going to take a look at potential tropical cyclone one. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, turn your notifications on because this way you don't miss us because we're on Sunday through Thursday at 7:35. Friday and Saturdays are usually off days for us, but if there's a storm around, we certainly will adjust the schedule accordingly and come on the occasional Friday and Saturday, and then maybe take another day off someplace else. And if you like the show, hit the like button because we like it when you hit the like button. And let me just really quick, Joe, just kind of look at some of these high temperatures today because they were. It made low 90s just about everywhere, with some exceptions. It looks like it only made mid 80s in and around New York City. Because LaGuardia only got to 80, was that 86 or 89? I'm having trouble seeing tonight. It looks like it's 86. And Perrytown, Joe, got to 88. But a lot of 90s in New Jersey, 94 in Middlesex County, observation station there. A 90, what is that? A 95 in Reading, Pennsylvania. There were a lot of 95s in parts of southeastern and south central Pennsylvania. And meanwhile, on the Long Island South Shore, it was mostly upper 70s and low 80s. Got a little warmer as you go a little bit more inland, but it was not too bad for Long Island, and 80s to around 90 in southern New England. You had some 90s again in upstate New York, upper 80s and low 90s there, and down into Virginia and Maryland. It wasn't terrible. It was mostly lower 90s, so kind of what we thought it would be. And we'll start tacking on a few degrees uh, for the next couple of days to take those numbers higher. And we'll see where it goes. But this heat wave's going to go on at least until Sunday. Johnny Quest, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. 77, Joe, was his high because he's 3,500 feet up in the mountains of northwestern Virginia. So there's a
That,
place to go if you want winter weather, you want to go there.
yeah, true. 3,500 feet will do it for you in February or January.
Well, we got a lot of severe weather going on tonight, so Joe is going to take a look at it now as he goes on the radar parade. And tonight's uh, parade is going to be running through from central Kansas all the way up northeastward into northern Minnesota, where there is a uh, really impressive looking squall line of storms that is moving through right now, and all sorts of severe weather.
Well, the thing that impresses me is the fact that if you look at the watches and warnings map from SPC, the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma. The thing that impressed the heck out of me right off the bat is that I would say about at least 80% of the state of Minnesota. Now, Minnesota is not exactly a small state. It's not the biggest, of course, but it's a fairly substantial area of real estate. And I would say at least 80% of Minnesota tonight, or at this moment in time, is under a tornado watch. And as Joe mentioned, there are there are significant storms out there associated with a squall line. In fact, I can bring this up to make it a little bit larger. This is from Minneapolis. And as you can see, here is the line that Joe, I think, is alluding to. It's a rather narrow line, but where it is occurring, it is embedded with some rather potent storm activity. These are the storms that quite possibly could lead to funnel clouds, to or tornadic activity, or at the very least, straight line damaging winds, maybe even a microburst or two. All of this traversing the area. Now, Minneapolis is right in the middle of your screen here. So this is an area that is passing actually to the north of Minneapolis. And there's another area to the south and west, not quite as potent. And it looks like on the final few frames of the loop, it's actually fading out a little bit of shower and storm activity. Let's move on to another spot.
Go to
Maybe
Duluth.
I'm going to do that right now. Whoa. Well, you asked for it, you got it. Here's Duluth, Minnesota, and you can see that that area, that line of severe weather, widens up a bit as you head to the north and to the east, and actually some of that activity now spilling over. I guess you call this the Arrowhead. I think this is the Arrowhead of Minnesota, which moves into the area around Lake Superior, and over here is Wisconsin, and a lot of these storms passing just off to the north of the northern border of Wisconsin. So this is all a Minnesota weather event. And as you can see, a lot of this activity containing at least moderate to heavy, if not torrential, downpours and probably again embedded heavy duty thunderstorms and showers. So all of this again moving on a track mostly to the east northeast. And this activity is an occurrence right now. The time right now is 7:50. For those of you who might be looking at this on a replay, 7:50 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So if you're watching later on in the night tonight, a lot of this stuff hopefully will have dissipated or will have moved on. But for the moment, at least, Minnesota, a good part of Minnesota, under the gun with heavy-duty shower activity, and again, potent thunderstorms with the potential of some of these storms spinning up some funnel cloud and tornadic activity. Again, Minnesota, about 80% of the state is underneath some kind of a tornado watch as of this particular moment in time in the early evening hours.
Right.
So
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, where else would you like to head? Further
Uh,
southward,
go,
Missouri.
go- let's see. Hold on one second. Let me just take a look. Go to southeast Nebraska and then go to central Kansas.
Here is Hastings. Wow. You talk about a squall line, right? Hastings, Nebraska, and Webster County. And this again shows a narrow. Now, the interesting thing is that whereas Minnesota is under a tornado watch, areas to the south, which would include, here in Hastings County or Webster County, Hastings, Nebraska, these areas are underneath just severe weather, severe thunderstorm watch. Although, don't leave out the possibility that some of this activity that you see here, the deep shades of red, might not be capable of producing tornadic activity, or at the very least, some damaging straight line winds. And again, this is a narrow but potent squall line, which is now working its way across parts of Nebraska right now. And if we move, let's say, to where else did you want to go, Joe? Kansas? Or
Central Kansas.
all right, we can go to voila, Wichita, and that area or zone of active weather just coming into the zone of the Wichita radar from the north and west. And again,
You might want to
very
go a little further west with that.
Yeah, why not? Let's instead go to how about how about Goodland, Kansas? Well, now I went a little bit too far west. Now you can see that area of squally weather that's off to the south and east of Goodland. This is the one that's also north and west of Wichita, Kansas. But you can see again, very, very potent activity occurring with some of these thunderstorms, and certainly something that the folks in Kansas will be watching as we progress through the evening hours. And let's see, where else can I go? We've been to Wichita. Let's go to Dodge City. That's where Marshall Dillon is right now. Matt Dillon, Gunsmoke, Dodge City. Anyway, the radar from Dodge City showing again a very potent squall line, which looks like it's getting ready, just about to reach the area of Dodge City. And again, some of these storms are rather loaded for bear, if you will, with possible torrential downpours, frequent, vivid, dangerous cloud to ground lightning, gusty winds, the whole 9 yards, all in this area. And again, these areas south of Minnesota, not under a tornado watch, but under a severe thunderstorm watch. I'm sure with some of these storms, they probably have thunderstorm warnings out for a variety of different locations. I do want to go to um, here in New York, Western New York. Let's go to Buffalo, and you can see that there's some potent storm activity here too. Now, a good part, as was the case last night, portions of western and central Pennsylvania and western and central New York State have a marginal risk of severe weather. And indeed, you could see that in some cases, northwestern Pennsylvania, south and east of Erie, and moving up into the vicinity around Buffalo, for example, there are some storms that do carry a bit of a wallop, and also across the border up in Canada, some rather potent thunderstorm activity as well. Localized, not anywhere near as extensive as what we've just seen in Minnesota or Nebraska or Kansas, but still something that if you live out in the western part of New York State or northwestern Pennsylvania, something for you to watch as we progress through the evening hours. Although now that we're approaching and will soon be past sundown in about a half an hour, once the sun goes down, I'm sure a lot of this activity you see here will fade out, and then we'll ramp up again tomorrow as we have another hot and humid day on tap.
All right, so since we're on the theme of severe weather, let's take you to the Storm Prediction Center and show you what's going on. Marginal risk in the Northeast and from northern Maine. Actually, much of New York State, Vermont, northern New Hampshire also under a marginal risk. It cuts across on a diagonal through Pennsylvania, cuts West Virginia in half, then swings back around in eastern Kentucky and goes all the way up into eastern Michigan. So there's some isolated severe thunderstorms going on there, and as Joe pointed out on the radar, they're there. And we also have a marginal risk in coastal Texas now from the rains from potential tropical cyclone one beginning to move onshore from the east. We'll get to that after we finish with this. And yes, we have severe thunderstorm watches that are up from Kansas up into the Iowa-Minnesota state line. Then it turns into a tornado watch. As Joe mentioned, at least half the state, if not more, is under a tornado watch at the moment. And for tomorrow, the next 2 days, we have small areas of marginal risk in South Texas for obvious reasons. Marginal risk, southern Wisconsin, northwestern Illinois, southeastern Iowa, and northeast Missouri. Also in northwest Texas and northwest Oklahoma, southeast uh, Colorado, southwest Kansas, northeast New Mexico. Southeast, northeast, southwest, northwest, and on it goes. They just can never make it simple for me. And then on day three, we have a marginal risk covering much of upstate New York and northernmost Pennsylvania, northeastward through Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And general thunderstorms reaching down almost, but not quite to Long Island and New York City. The line cuts right through Long Island Sound and then cuts across North Jersey for the general thunderstorm expectations but again, it may be more isolated and scattered than anything else, perhaps more than scattered when you go up into upstate New York come Friday. But we'll on Thursday into Friday, and we'll show you what the models are doing with that. Now, let's go to potential tropical cyclone one. And this is the close up visible satellite loop, which I'm going to refresh now. And you can see the lightning strikes and some bands that are around it. You can also see a circulation center there of low and middle clouds, but we don't. A couple of lightning strikes are showing up now northwest of the center, but they're not really lasting very long. So this thing is it's a broad low. We still don't see evidence of a core trying to form here near the center. Being that it's broad and stretched out, we are dealing with a gradient that's on the tight side along the Texas coast. And in fact, the Hurricane Center actually extended tropical storm warnings further north along the Texas coast tonight. And also the moisture that's offshore, this is all moderate to heavy rain that is backing westward. But actually, in coastal Texas today, it was a nice day for at least part of the day. But we're starting to see the clouds rolling in, and before too long, we're going to get into some rain. And in fact, here's a tighter view of the latest on the wide view radar here. You can see the rain in it's actually reached up as far north as central Louisiana. That's how, and the low center is actually off the bottom of this. If you got to move the radar down just a little bit, the low center is somewhere in here. So a lot of the actual, the heavy rains are all up to the north and northwest of the low center and on its way westward. One of the other things that the Hurricane Center did comment on is the fact that it still seems to be moving very slowly. Um, when it when the center makes the left turn and starts to turn more westerly, it's supposed to, and the ridge begins to build to the northeast. That should make it move a bit faster. But slow movement in a situation like this is a concern because you want the rain to come and go. You don't want it to be prolonged. I mean, even just the fact that it would come and go is still going to probably produce 5 to 10 inch rainfalls in a lot of places and localized flash flooding. But you don't want something like this to hang around even for a few extra hours because then suddenly 10 inches could easily become 12 or 13 or more. But this is the risk zone here, and the Hurricane Center on their on their forecast map. They have it becoming a tropical storm by early tomorrow afternoon. They were on prior forecasts. They haven't had it becoming a tropical storm overnight, but still don't see evidence that that core center is trying to form. 22.4, 92.8 west. That's about 390 miles or so, or maybe a little bit less than that, southeast of Brownsville. So it's got some water to cross here, and it does have some time. They're forecasting a landfall early Thursday morning along the coast of Mexico, well south of Brownsville. But they have pushed that tropical storm warning up, the blue line indicating a tropical storm warning. They have pushed that up further north. And you can see it here that it runs almost, but not quite, to Galveston and the Houston area and extends all the way down into Brownsville. There'll probably be gales here 40, 45 mile an hour gusts, perhaps, but I don't think it's going to be anything unmanageable. The one issue, where are we in the moon phase, Joe? Because the low sitting down here, and the prolonged period of south and southeast winds along the Louisiana coast, and then more of an east wind along the Texas coast is probably going to bring some coastal flooding issues.
Well, we're approaching full phase, Joe. In fact, I think full moon is on Friday, June 21st. So the moon is getting into that alignment where we will have astronomically higher than normal tides or spring tides because of the moon phase, and that's not coming at a good time when you have that kind of situation in the Gulf of Mexico. By the way, Cecilia Hernandez on the chat board posting a question. He said, why is it called potential tropical cyclone one and not potential cyclone Alberto? And I believe the reason is is that if this storm does not make it to tropical storm status, and of course, if it doesn't, then it doesn't become Alberto. I mean, why? Then what are you going to do? I mean, then you have another storm that might be, let's say, out in the Caribbean or off the coast of Africa. You're going to call that potential tropical cyclone Alberto? No, you don't. Uh, it's better, at least from the standpoint of the folks at the Hurricane Center, to simply use numerology here, and so that's probably why they're calling it potential tropical cyclone number one. And when it does get a name, it will be Alberto, and then things will change from that regard. But right now, we're still working on getting the first tropical cyclone of the season, so that's why they're using numbers and not necessarily a name. Because again, if it doesn't form, if then we don't use Alberto here, then it gets kind of funny if you end up looking at another system somewhere else and calling it potential storm Alberto.
And the other reason is um, it doesn't have a core. I mean, it doesn't really look all that tropical here on the loop. Uh, if you start to see a core form in near the center, where you've got some convection going on near the center, then and stronger winds begin to coalesce around the center, then you would have this upgraded to a tropical storm. In some instances, you can go from a potential tropical cyclone even to a tropical depression, sort of a step in the middle. So you don't assign a name to it, and it would just be confusing. As Joe pointed out, it would be very confusing if they called this potential tropical cyclone Alberto. What if there were two potential tropical cyclones like this at the same time? Are you going to use the same potential for both names? You don't know. You don't know which one's going to become a tropical storm first, or if only one becomes one, or maybe none of them would become one. So it keeps it simple to call it that way. You have to ring the bell for Donald Cheese Doodle, who just hit super chat. He is new to the chat board, and when you go by Donald Cheese Doodle, you deserve to have the Joe Radio bell rung.
There you go. Donald Cheese Doodle, amazing. We have all kinds of crazy names out there on the chat board sometimes. I,
Right.
I, I do want to mention Johnny Quest was asking, with 40-mile-per-hour sustained winds, wouldn't it be a tropical storm now? Well, yeah. The criteria for a tropical storm is 39 miles per hour or higher. This has sustained winds of 40 miles an hour, but it doesn't, as Joe said, it does not have a core yet. It doesn't have a circulation
Well,
center.
it has a circulation. It's just very broad.
Right.
And it doesn't have that tighter core center where there's convection developing around. You can see on the loop where the center is. I mean, it's fairly clear. You can see the clouds rotating. It's trying to. You're also seeing some higher cloud tops starting to blow up to the northeast and northwest of there, and on a couple of frames, you also have some lightning strikes. So maybe by tomorrow morning, you might have a core, in which case they'll upgrade it.
And then it will become Alberto, the
That
first of the
is
season.
that is correct.
Not
So,
VO5, but number one.
and I did put up the spaghetti plots, which show the models, the various hurricane models, and they're sort of they haven't really shifted in any one particular direction or the other. The outliers are all, even the outlier to the north is south of Brownsville in terms of the center. But again, in this particular instance, because it's so broad, as we showed you on the radar, how far north the rain shield is, that uh, uh, focusing on the center here, just because it's going inland in Mexico by a really solid distance, the rain goes so far north, and you got this flow. It's such a large low that is in the Western Gulf that the rain is the bigger deal here for South and East Texas, South and Southeast Texas, and even back into parts of Louisiana, which are getting rain. And that I think is the what most folks need to pay attention to. And I'll just go back here and pull up WPC's rainfall potential here. And we've got a red area now. I'm sorry, an orange area that they've added on the latest forecast that they put out earlier this afternoon. around Corpus Christi of 8 to 12 inches of rain, and in the uh, neck the shade of brown uh, that extends down almost to Brownsville and almost back to Laredo. That is 6 to 8. The yellow is 4 to 6. So I would think that even in the areas where you have the 2 to 4 inch rains, which is the darker blue, is almost touching Houston and over Galveston. That this is a flash flood potential situation. And in the mountains of Mexico, you've got that red area there of 12 to 16. I'm not sure what that is. Mountains we're talking about here. So mudslides and all the rest of it. This is not going to be. This is not fun by any stretch of the imagination. Actually, um, on the 7 o'clock advisory, which I gave, okay, it was 22.4, 92.28, northwest at 6, 999 millibars. That's pretty low, pressure wise. If it had a tighter core, Joe, this would be a tropical storm just based on pressure. With the 999 pressure, you probably, if you had a developing core, you probably would have sustained winds maybe of 45 or even 50 miles an hour out of this.
Yes, no question. But it still needs to meet a couple of more criteria before it finally does, get christened. It's moving slow enough, and it'll probably stay over the Gulf of Mexico long enough so that it will ultimately become, however, for shorter time, our first tropical system, tropical storm, Alberto. So just wait. It'll probably happen within the next 24 hours.
And you see the red boxes there off the Texas coast and along and just inland of the coast. Those are tropical storm warnings that are up. The green is flood watches. Now, South Texas down to Brownsville, they have a special weather statement that's kind of superseding the flood watches. The flash flood watches go all the way down to Brownsville and then all the way up along the coast of southeast Texas and into southwestern parts of Louisiana. The winter storm warnings, by the way, as I mentioned in Idaho, are gone, and also the ones in Montana are gone. But we actually have frost advisories up in western North Dakota, a few counties in Idaho, and some counties in northeastern Nevada. There's your severe thunderstorm watch or watches from Kansas to the Iowa Minnesota line, and then the yellow is all tornado warnings. All those reds you see, those dark reds, one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 counties here. Those are flash flood warnings that are up, and we also have. I don't see any severe thunderstorm warnings at the moment. And by the way, it is 8:10. So as always, if severe weather is your issue and you're watching from a place that's having severe weather, you want to go to weather.gov for the latest weather information because we're live now, but if you're watching this on a replay, obviously what you're seeing is dated. Also, we have a severe thunderstorm. No, I'm sorry. These are heat advisories. Eastern Iowa, northwestern Illinois. Also for southern Michigan, the southern half of Michigan, northern Indiana, and then through Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, much of New Jersey, New York State, Long Island, and New York City are still not in it, but they will get in it. Uh, Eventually. Connecticut, up into Massachusetts, and the purples that you see, these patches of purples, are areas where we have excessive heat warnings that have already been put up, and we also still have excessive heat watches up as well, which will probably go to excessive heat warnings when the time comes. And here's the satellite loop from the full U.S. view. And you can see the lightning strikes from these scattered thunderstorms going on in western New York and western Pennsylvania, down into parts of West Virginia and even into eastern Kentucky. They seem to be fading away at the moment. You see potential tropical cyclone one with the perspective of the wider view, and then that long line of heavy to potentially severe thunderstorms from northeastern Minnesota all the way down into central Kansas. Most of the West is doing nice today, and that's a good thing because it's always nice when it's nice in the West. Now, WPC on the rainfall, half to 3/4 inch rainfall, some pockets of an inch and a half being indicated. Now, there's probably going to be more thunderstorm activity from this heat in parts of upstate New York and into New England, which is why the amounts here are higher. And then they sharply drop. They have 1/4 of an inch for Long Island and and northern New Jersey, except the extreme north. And then it goes down to a tenth of an inch or less. So you see how the ridge of high pressure cuts out this huge, almost like a giant cookie here that gets cut out from the mid Atlantic and South Atlantic states, west back through Texas and into Oklahoma, where you get little or no precip out of this. So all the moisture, the east winds bringing all this tropical moisture and running it up into the Texas coast and inland as well. And then even all the way back into West Texas, looking at 3/4 of an inch to some pockets of an inch and a half. That runs up through eastern New Mexico. And then, of course, it runs northeastward from there on the backside of the ridge and ahead of the deep trough in the west, where you have heavy rains in parts of southern Kansas. All of this convectively driven, inch and a half to 2.5 inches. And then you've got an area of 2.5 to 3.5 inches across Minnesota, with northwest Wisconsin, and parts of the upper peninsula of Michigan. So, we we're pretty much in the same place we were yesterday with all of this. There's your big ridge in the east. The upper high was centered over Virginia and North Carolina and continuing to build northward. Builds right over New York City on Wednesday morning, probably centered right over New Jersey, and just kind of sits there. The models have really backed off from this mega high that they were trying to build aloft up in upstate New York and into central New England, where everybody was going crazy with the European and those 109-degree temperatures, which were never going to happen to begin with. There's your deep trough in the west. The ridge is going to slowly start to weaken late this week. But the problem is we got to get, if you look at the upper flow, okay, if you look at the upper flow, there's this trough that's along the west coast here. So, it goes, pretty much west to east across southern Canada. And, the air coming around the high here, even though the ridge is flattening, we're not getting into a flow that's coming out of southern Canada or any place north of there. It's just basically blowing the same hot air around in a sense. And the upper high by Thursday evening is now centering itself. And when I say flatter, it looks more east-west as opposed to a bulging north-south upper high. It will continue to flatten, and then as we get into Friday, there's a little bit more of we're just sort of on the edge of a northwest flow from Canada. So this is where we'll just have to watch. There might be a little ripple, a little short wave that moves along there with a weak front that comes down and tries to produce some storms with that. And then gradually, as we go through the weekend, you can see how the ridge is just about gone, and there's a strong short wave that comes down into the western Great Lakes Sunday afternoon and then swings into the Northeast Sunday night and Monday. So that should bring some showers, some thunderstorms. Who knows? It might even bring some severe weather ahead of the front later Sunday afternoon and evening. And then if it takes another day or so for that upper trough to get out of the way, it'll keep things on the coolish side. Well, not cool is not the right word. Maybe lower humidity coming. Although
Not
if the
not as I was just going to say, not as humid.
right, not as humid. The only thing is, if the front winds up lagging a bit, waiting for the upper trough to go by, it may mean for some lingering clouds and maybe lingering showers into Monday. But then it pulls out, and we still have a bit of a northwest flow through much of next week. So I would say that after that front goes by, it probably doesn't get immediately hot uh, once the trough pulls out. But eventually, we do have a ridge that builds back in for the last weekend of June. So here it is all over again. Another big upper high builds up into the Northeast and into New England. So the 90s will be coming back by the end of next week if they disappear for a few days at the beginning of the week. And you might as well look at the first few days of July in the long range. I mean, it does kind of look to be on the very warm to hottish side. It's summer. This is what happens.
Yeah, the only problem is that they're making a big deal out of the fact that, oh my goodness, it's never gotten this hot so early.
Oh, stop.
It's
You
funny.
know, they just, they make stuff up out of You know what they do that on, Joe? They base it on their own personal experiences and memories. Oh, I know. Every year we go through the same thing with regards to certain weather patterns at certain times of the year. And every year you'll have a whole bunch of people saying this has never happened before.
Well, I certainly remember the summer of 1988. And if I recall correctly, we had our first, and it was not just a short, it was a protracted spell of hot weather. Our first heat wave sometime in the early to middle part of June, and that was just the beginning. I think we had something like 30 or 35 days that year, that summer, of 90 plus degree temperatures. It was one of the most, you know, ugh, summers I could ever remember. Maybe the summer of 1999 beat that, but still, I say to myself, yeah, I can remember when it got hot
Yeah.
in, in mid June. But it's a record breaking heat. And
Oh,
again, as yesterday,
stop.
we have a new branding now to go along with the polar vortex and the atmospheric river and the Pineapple Express and the heat dome. The heat dome now. That's the new thing. Whenever it gets hot now, we'll be hearing about, oh, well, there must be a heat dome somewhere, and that's it. A new terminology.
Yes, it's just so annoying. It really is. Uh, Never on me. Let me just move on. Uh, there's your, you have your east-west Bermuda high. Excuse me, and you've got your broad low in the Texas Gulf Coast, which kind of lingers there, tightens up a little bit uh, tomorrow at Wednesday afternoon and Wednesday night. So maybe you'll get the name out of the way, and then it goes inland. Meanwhile, in the Northeast, you can see there's a little bubble high that moves over the Lake Superior there, and it's rolling along. And there's kind of an east-west little frontal boundary here. This is Thursday night. You just draw it in. It's kind of like it's a weak little boundary there. It's a little cooler to the north, but not much. And the line gets to about New York City, and then it just basically either sits there or falls apart. Now, the GFS has got some showers and storms around on Friday during the day. So I suppose that if that's the case, if this winds up being correct, it would argue that Friday might not be as hot, if only because of the fact that you might have more clouds around and maybe some showers and thunderstorms scattered around. So we'll have to watch to see how that plays out. And then it goes back north anyway. So here we go on Saturday, maybe some late storms on Saturday. Here comes the cold front for Sunday with some showers and storms late in the day, later in the day, Sunday into Sunday night. And then still some lingering around on Monday, because as we said, that upper trough is taking a little longer to move through. And then, I mean, there's no real push of it's drier air. It's slightly drier air, but you still have a 576 thickness here, so it's still going to be very warm under all of this. And then as we head toward the latter part of the week, that's when we get back into the big ridge. And by the way, pressures are still going to be low in the Gulf of Mexico down into the Caribbean. So don't be shocked that another system might spin up here come later next week in the Gulf of in either in the Gulf of Mexico or the Southwest Gulf or even the Northwest Caribbean. I think the Hurricane Center even put it on their tropical weather outlook, talking about the fact that there might be a second spin up later next week.
Well, yeah, I saw one report. I think it was on CBS Evening News, National News, and Alberto, when it does finally form, if it does form, they're already gone past that. So, and also, Nora, after Alberto, we're going to have another potential tropical. They have to already. Like I said, the tropical system we're watching now in the Gulf of Mexico hasn't even officially formed yet, and they're already talking about the next system that's gonna. What are you gonna
Doesn't
do?
stop. I just pulled up the European, not the AI, but the regular European, and I'm just looking at Friday. So Thursday, you get some thunderstorm development way up and up north of I-90 in upstate New York. Then they sort of fall apart at night. But then, that frontal boundary is lying close on Friday, and it does. This is kind of what SPC's got with that marginal risk going pretty far south on Friday, and European does produce these just show some thunderstorm activity Friday afternoon. in upstate New York that gets down to the coast from the north. That should be interesting to see if if it does wind up happening there, because sometimes you can get some pretty potent storms in a setup like this.
Yeah, sometimes you do. These backdoor fronts, sometimes in the Northeast, in the summertime, can yield some very significant weather. Heavy rains, damaging thunderstorm activity. So you got to watch it sometimes, and that's what we're looking at. Friday into Saturday, we'll have this front flirting with the tri-state New York area, if not over, just to the north, and then it will push on back north as a warm front across the Northeast, probably in time for Sunday.
And the European and the Southwest Gulf system goes inland, but then when we get to the weekend, there's another broad low that forms in the Southwest Gulf and takes a track very similar and brings rain into South Texas again. So these are things that certain areas of the country, if you live there, you're going to have to be paying attention to in the coming days. And now, as I bring us back full screen so everybody can see our lovely faces, um, you know what time it is, Joe, right?
It is Briller Jeopardy time.
Correct. And by the way, before we do that, ring the bell for Johnny Quest because he hit super chat tonight, so we can ring the bell for Johnny
I
too.
guess since we're not hitting 100 likes anymore because we have fewer people hitting the like button. There you go, Johnny. That's just for you, not for anybody else. Just for you. And also Mr. Cheese Doodle or whatever his name is.
Yes, that was that made that made my day. It really did. It was Donald Cheese Doodle.
Yes.
Donald Cheese Doodle. Okay, today we're doing retired hurricane names, and the letter M, as in Mary, and there are six M storms, Joe, that are retired. And Jason Fox hits the first one with Maria. Bonus points if you get the year, by the way, 2017. Maria.
Right. My daughter's name is Maria. Mitch, I think Mitch was should be on that list.
Mitch is on the list, yes, in 1998. Mitch. Maria and Mitch, and Maggie P. and Frank R. And Anthony Orr are yelling Michael. And Patrick Darcy says Michael in 2018. That is correct. Michael is 2018. So we've got Maria, we've got Michael, we've got Mitch, and John Melander and Carol DeChiara have Matthew. Matthew in 2016.
Right.
And Dennis Cassia, and there's one other person here. Oh, and Rich Rothmansky with Marilyn. Marilyn, who while she wasn't working on the Munsters, decided to get herself named as a hurricane, and now she was retired, and that was in 1995. So we have Maria, Marilyn, Matthew, Michael, and Mitch. One more.
Marmaluke.
No, actually, it's pretty easy, Joe. If we have Michael, so that's the male version of that name, and we have
Michelle.
Michelle. Yes, Michelle in 2001. And some of you have put up the years. Very impressive. 2001. So that's it. Maria, Marilyn, Matthew, Michael, Michelle, and Mitch. All of the retired M names. And that is that.
And that's that. There's
That
not
is
much.
that.
Remember on
Oh,
Courageous Remember on Courageous Cat when Minute Mouse
gee,
fell in
courageous.
Remember when Minute Mouse fell in love with Marilyn Mouse?
Actually, I do have a question for you. I
Yeah.
do have a question for you. Let me see how good you know this. Okay. So on Batman, we know on Batman we had all these criminals, like that they all had all sorts of, they all went by different names, the Joker, the Riddler, and so on. Um, Ethel Merman was a criminal on Batman.
Oh,
Can you remember who she played? Who her
you know,
character was?
if I know that Joan Collins played the siren.
Right.
If she wasn't the siren, Ethel Merman could have been the siren for that voice of hers.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
it wasn't Ma Barker, was it? No,
No, no. That was Shelley Winters.
Abby Winters played Ma Barker. Oh, that's so bad. I remember Ethel Merman was a villainess on Batman. I just simply don't remember the name.
I happened to see a picture of from when they were shooting a scene when she was there, and they had a picture of the cast standing around.
Well, anyway,
Lola Lasagna.
Lolo lasagna.
I got a kick out of that. Lola Lasagna. Oh, good God. All right. Well, it's what time? It is now 8:20
28.
28 Eastern
W
time.
W
WCBS News Time is 8:28.
traffic and weather together now.
Yes, exactly. I don't. Do they still do that? I'm sure they do.
Oh yeah, they do.
Yeah, that's what makes their money, I guess. All right, the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast is brought to you by Tempest by WeatherFlow. Get the revolutionary Tempest weather system. Join the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. The link is on the description to this podcast. The coupon code is Spring 2024. Use it. And if you do, you will get.
10% off.
If you don't use it, you won't get.
10% off.
Exactly. So for Lola Lasagna and the Joker and anybody else, uh, have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you here tomorrow night at 7:35 p.m. Eastern Time.
I have nothing else to add.
Oh, then
So,
say good night, Joe.
good night, Joe.